Today's podcast is brought to you by AdvertiseCast. AdvertiseCast is the simple way to grow your business or get your app, book, brand, or funding campaign noticed. AdvertiseCast.com.
Welcome to the Drift and Ramble podcast. I'm Steve Blizin. Each episode will explore true stories and American legends. From the pages of history and a few stories handed down over the years, we'll look at the people, places, and events that helped shape a nation. Stories of survival, notable frontier men and women, explorers who struck it rich, and the outlaws that stole it from them. There'll be studies of saloon girls, swindlers, banditry, and bad men, profiles of lawmen and American Indians, and the good and evil that existed between them. We'll amble through the past. We'll delve into the folklore of the times and maybe even uncover a ghost story or two. So, saddle up or settle in for the Drift and Ramble podcast. This is Season 1, Episode 10. Due to the graphic nature of this episode, listener discretion is advised. Of all the animals of the Wild West, none is so pervasive, so familiar, and so maligned as the coyote. The coyote is a cousin to the gray wolf, but surprisingly, the coyote is also more closely related to its prehistoric ancestors than the wolf. Perhaps an indication this creature has no interest in evolving as a species. But don't be fooled by this misleading misconception. The coyote is indeed evolving. Misinformation is but one of the coyote's tricks. The coyote is a staple of mythology to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, appearing as early as in Aztec cultures, where the origins of its name, coyote, are rooted. It is simply a corruption of the Spanish word for the animal. Native American creation stories from the Northern California Maidu people include a creator myth in which the coyote is with the creator as he creates other animals. In their story, the creator is at work, fashioning various creatures out of clay, while the coyote attempts to do the same. This myth affords the coyote the same powers as the creator. But because the coyote keeps laughing during his work, his efforts do not turn out well. The creator tells the coyote that if he did not laugh so much, he might have more success. But the coyote denied laughing, and thus the first lie was told. Commonly portrayed in other cultures as deceptive, mischievous, elusive, and a thief, the coyote is both revered and maligned in a single breath. Called a trickster, a prankster, and a shapeshifter, sometimes depicted as part man and part dog, the coyote straddles the worlds of darkness and light, sometimes as a harbinger of change. Among the Great Plains tribes, the coyote is an imposter, one who impersonates the creator himself. And in other indigenous peoples' mythology, the coyote is credited as a hero for stealing fire from the gods and sharing it with man to light the world. It's the coyote who defeats the monstrous thunderbird and the being that first teaches man how to fish. The coyote is at once a powerful being, credited as a partner to the creator, and at the same time being the lowly, shameful scavenger by which his often bedraggled appearance is more befitting. In these creation stories, the coyote is sometimes a noble trickster, one who shares good fortune with mankind, and sometimes a malicious being who misuses his powers or plays pranks out of cruelty upon those he does not favor. One thing that appears to be a common thread among all these stories is the coyote is sacred and closely associated with creationism and birth. Only the coyote and the crow are such common characters in mythology, typically associated with transformation and resurrection. But only the coyote is paradoxically foolish and wise, heroic and villainous, respected and feared. Perhaps these are the reasons the coyote is so fearless among man, for coyotes rarely run away when encouraged to do so. Coyotes simply turn and move aside enough to make room, but they do not give up ground nor show any sign of fear. It's as if they know something we do not know. As if to say, "You can do whatever you want to me, but I will continue to exist."
All right, a North County dog is missing tonight after being attacked by two coyotes right outside the family's front door.
And now they're concerned for their toddler and their neighbor's pets.
Of all of my own personal encounters with coyotes, I have never known one to show any fear of man. Curiosity, yes, but fear? No.
Tonight, authorities are investigating after a man says he watched a coyote attack and kill his dog near Coors and I-40. Last month, we told you a dog was killed by coyotes on Atrisco Drive.
As you can see, there's blood marks down here where they first grabbed her.
The attack happened too fast for him to stop it.
We were leaving, me and my little dog Penny.
3 coyotes lunged at the dog, tearing apart her little body. Martinez ran to get this stick to fight them off, but it was too late.
She already had big old puncture holes in her and shattered ribs. We just kissed her goodbye and said bye to the dog.
And this is the second homeowner in the span of a month to lose a pet to coyotes on this block of Atrisco Road Northwest.
According to their feeding habits, coyotes are mostly carnivores, but they'll eat insects, berries, fruits, and even prickly pear cactus from time to time. Still, they prefer to eat deer, elk, squirrels, rabbits, mice, gophers, beaver, ground-nesting birds, amphibians, snails, lizards, and fish. With such a varied appetite, it seems that coyotes will eat just about anything. But human attacks are rare. Or at least they used to be.
All right, how terrifying is this? A woman jogging this morning in Kensington was bitten by a coyote before being chased by that very same animal through the neighborhood. The attack happened in the 4800 block of East Alder Drive right here.
The deputy, the game warden who took the report, told me he's never documented such a case. She was eventually able to scare it off, but not before a huge effort on her part.
All of a sudden, I feel there's something bite my leg. I look down and, it's a coyote.
It was about the size of a German Shepherd and relentless.
I turned around and he, was continuing to run towards me. So I started running backwards because I didn't want to turn my back on him.
At that point, Janet began fearing for her life.
Like I was screaming and yelling, waving my hands, try to make, as much noise as possible. And he would pause and then he would keep running.
Janet continued screaming and yelling until the coyote finally ran off into a nearby canyon. Soon after, Janet drove to urgent care, had her wound treated, and received several shots to reduce the chance of contracting rabies. Department of Fish and Wildlife tell me they consider that coyote that bit Janet a public threat. They're now working on a plan to remove that coyote from this neighborhood, an effort that could begin as soon as tonight.
Today, especially in Southern California, where the bulk of coyote attacks are reported, they all stem from mostly urban areas, where coyotes dwell, all but unnoticed, among the mostly concrete, glass, and steel landscape. And while it was once believed, up until very recently, coyotes were not a threat to full-grown adults, that too is changing. Coyotes were, perhaps mistakenly, thought to be less likely to hunt in packs. But evidence now suggests that they can and do display this behavior. A frightening consideration, as these lowly critters now take on the same characteristics as their relatives, the wolves.
A pack of killer coyotes, our top story at 5:30. They're on the prowl in Lapeer County, and one attack is hitting home at the Sheriff's Department.
7 Action News reporter Kimberly Craig tells us what happened there.
And now coyotes have killed Deputy Callie Myers' 27-year-old horse.
Residents may be used to seeing one coyote roaming around, but several coyotes visited a neighborhood in northwest Albuquerque this morning as kids were heading off to school.
Well, Doug, today the Urban Biology Department was out in this neighborhood. They were handing out flyers on how to deal with coyote problems. And that's when a whole pack of coyotes decided to come and make a visit, sending the whole community into panic mode. The pack of coyotes caused a stir Thursday morning near a Trisco Drive in Sequoia in northwest Albuquerque.
So over the summer, when temperatures are really hot, coyotes are primarily nocturnal. They're coming out at night. A lot of times people don't see them. Now that we're in the cooler temperatures, they're a lot more active now.
The good news, experts say normally coyotes wouldn't harm people.
Humans are not on their radar as far as being a food source.
Officials say don't back down and don't run.
You want to make yourself as large as possible. So, raise your hands up above your head, shout at them, move toward them slowly, shouting at them so that they get the idea that you're big and bad and they want to move away from you.
Once, while riding my mountain bike through an urban park trail on my way to work, I was suddenly surrounded by 3 coyotes, while 2 more stood vigil on a hilltop. It was early in the morning, and though light enough to see, it was just before the sun had chased away the shadows from the canyon through which I rode. As I rounded the corner quickly, I was surprised to find the trail blocked by an unusually large coyote, who spun around to face me as I pulled against my brakes. He did not yield the road to me, but stood there in the center of the trail, observing me carefully. It was as if he was deciding whether I was prey or not. I had stopped about 10 or 15 feet away from him, and was only just taking into account the massive size of this animal compared to most coyotes I had seen, and that's when a second, smaller coyote came up into view, from behind a knoll closer to me and just to the right. Then, a third coyote made its presence known to me, standing in the high grass along the trail's ridge on the left side of the trail. Unclipping my feet from my pedals, I thought about using my bike as a shield against an attack. Raising my arms up high and wide to make myself appear as large as possible, I yelled forcefully, "Hi-ya! Go on! Get out of here! Ha!" 2 more coyotes came into view upon a not-so-distant hilltop. They did not startle, they did not blink, they did not avert their gaze. They did not yield an inch of ground to me. These animals did not react at all. They stood steadfast, not showing the slightest reaction or interest in my offensive efforts. I wasn't sure if I should ride on or dismount, but I decided I could gain enough speed by riding to at least cause some damage in a collision if they attempted to bring me down. Pure primal fear forced my adrenal glands into action. Checking my left and right sides for any sign of movement, I eased my leg forward and pushed off into a fast pedal, aiming my bike directly for the biggest coyote in the trail and yelling at the top of my lungs. The largest coyote moved slightly to the right, giving me just enough room to get by him on the trail, but not enough room to show the slightest sign of fear. They all could have easily taken me down, but they allowed me to ride on. They should have spooked at the moment of my aggression towards them, but they didn't budge 1 inch. Instead, they treated me with casual indifference, as if to say, "You are nothing in our world. Stop thinking yourself so grand. Today, we are permitting you to continue your journey." Though I did my best to try not to show them any fear, I certainly did feel fearful, right down to my very core. But coyotes should be feared. They are indeed ferocious, indiscriminate killers capable of incredible speed and destruction. They can leap a great distance, climb with surprising agility, and outmaneuver and evade any attempt at capture. They can hide in plain sight, adapt to any landscape and environment quickly and with ease. What's more, they can teach what they learn to their young, making them one of the few species who pass along acquired knowledge, something somewhat unusual among the animal kingdom. Perhaps most frightening of all, the coyote can breed among dogs and wolves, thus inheriting a cunning skill set that could prove deadly to those who have little knowledge or respect for the trickster's prowess, fearlessness towards man, and the efficiency of pack hunting. It's this crossbreeding capability that may be the most frightening facet of all the trickster's skills.
It's very frightening. They're out here thick as thieves, and it's scary.
You need to be aware. You need to keep your children in if that's going on. You need to bring your animals in. It's a growing problem.
We don't see this kind of pack behavior very often, so that's surprising to us.
And while there is no documented coyote attack on a human in Michigan, Deputy Myers says the ones she's seen and photographed on her property don't seem to be scared of people. Wildlife experts say if you see one, make a lot of noise, make yourself look big and scary, bang pots and pans, honk horns, and watch out for anything they could eat.
Coyotes will take an easy meal wherever they can, so make sure there's no cat food, dog food, bird seed on your property. That'll help keep coyotes away.
I think they've been waiting for an opportunity.
And Sunday afternoon, a pack of coyotes made their move, attacking K.O. Carmen, an 1,100-pound horse with the Lapeer County Sheriff's Mounted Unit.
In 2009, 19-year-old Canadian folk singer Taylor Mitchell parked her car and prepared to go on a short hike. She had planned to go along the Skyline Trail in Cape Breton Highlands National Park in Nova Scotia. It was a brilliant October afternoon, and the young environmentalist and avid hiker was looking forward to some alone time on the trail after a busy summer of touring. Her debut album, Consider Me, was gaining in popularity, and the world was just beginning to open up to her advancing musical career. After parking, leaving her car, and hiking up the access road towards the Skyline Trail, she was passed by a middle-aged American couple walking in the opposite direction at 2:45 p.m. Soon after, however, she stopped and doubled back towards the parking area for unknown reasons, perhaps to return to her car for something. There is some speculation that she may have already been stalked by a coyote at this stage. Meanwhile, the American couple saw two coyotes walking towards them on the trail. The coyotes did not veer off the trail as they passed. The couple stopped, and the man took a picture of them. The photograph was time-stamped 3:02 p.m. Later, Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources research scientist Brent Patterson would comment that the two coyotes pictured in the American's photograph exhibited extraordinary lack of fear and displayed an almost dominant attitude towards the hikers, as they did not yield the trail in any way. It is believed these two coyotes met up with young Taylor Mitchell further up the trail. Two coyotes in the front, one trailing from behind from the rear. A classic pack hunting formation. 6 minutes later, the American hikers heard what sounded like coyotes howling or a young woman screaming. They couldn't be sure. The couple immediately reported the incident from a call box in the parking area. Minutes later, another group of 3 male hikers pulled into the parking area. The American couple approached them and informed them of what they had just heard. Soon, the hikers began to find personal items along the trail. Car keys, a small knife, scraps of torn and bloody clothing, leading the group to find an even larger bloody scene. The blood trail took them to a clearing where they found blood smeared on the door of a washroom. At 3:25 p.m., they found Taylor, still conscious, laying in the brush by some nearby trees, with a coyote standing over her, snarling at the group of intruders. 3 men charged at the coyote several times, but it would not move. They ran at it again and again, until finally the animal moved far enough away from Taylor to approach her. The coyote was completely unafraid of human contact. As her rescuers approached, the coyote continued to aggressively protect its newly fallen prey, snarling and growling, until finally a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer arrived and fired off his shotgun in the direction of the coyote. Though paramedics arrived on the scene about as quickly as was possible, Taylor's wounds were so severe and her blood loss so great that Taylor would not recover. And as a result of her death, she became the first human death attributed to a coyote attack in Canada, and only the second human death attributed directly to a coyote attack. Just days prior to her death, Taylor had been nominated for a Canadian Folk Music Award as Young Performer of the Year. For several hours following the attack, the park was closed, and an aggressive, fearless female coyote was killed in the same location of the attack by wardens. In the days that followed, 3 other animals were killed or trapped in the vicinity. They were all studied forensically, where it was determined that 3 of the 4 animals taken, including an unusually large 42-pound male, were linked through DNA samples to the violent attack. Though some speculated that Taylor Mitchell may have somehow provoked the attack by feeding the animals, disturbing a den, or running away, quite possibly the worst thing you can do, the evidence suggests that she was stalked and methodically killed with pack-hunting tactics similar to the ways wolves can take down an animal 10 times or more their own size. It's a matter of record that only 2 coyotes have taken down and killed a 400-pound female moose. So, a 19-year-old lone female was no match at all for 3 aggressive coyotes. Coyotes in the region of Nova Scotia have been known to be inbreeding with wolves since the early 1900s, but the tactic of pack hunting is relatively new behavior. So are the incidence and frequency of attacks. Since the 1970s, most of the reported cases of coyote attacks come from Los Angeles County, California, where the collision course of urban sprawl and dwindling habitat have reached a fevered pitch. While most reported coyote attacks against humans involve children, the attacks seem to be trending towards more aggressive behavior from coyotes. Some cite that as the practice of harassment of these opportunistic predators by rural landowners and farmers has declined, the coyote has become more fearless of man, and that, combined with increased population density, has created more opportunity for the coyote. And let's not forget those who feed, either intentionally or not, this scavenger of the desert. When you leave a food bowl out for Fido or your feline friends in Southern California, you can rest assured that they are not the only ones feeding from your bowl. In the area near the snow-packed eastern Sierra Mountains, near Lake Tahoe, California, a man's 4-year-old daughter had been outside playing in the snow when her screams permeated the brisk morning air. Her father rushed outside to her aid and chased away the lone attacker far enough away to retrieve the injured girl. But the coyote, teeth bared and growling, remained in the unfenced yard until police arrived and shot it. Although the girl's heavy jacket and snow pants protected all but her face, the coyote still did plenty of damage to the girl. After the coyote was dispatched, it was learned a neighbor had reported being bitten that same morning while feeding a coyote in his own backyard. Populations and concentrations of coyotes are expanding exponentially. These scruffy thieves thrive where no one sees them, building up their numbers, gathering their armies, patiently awaiting the opportunity to upset the delicate balance of our lives. But let us not forget the wisdom of our forefathers, for these snarling beasts are the harbingers of change. Our ancestors knew of their inherent powers, the same, you may recall, as the creators. Teeth bared, ears pinned back, spine arched, eyes fixed and glaring. Perhaps this feral army of desert dogs is assembling to teach us a lesson, to teach us humility. Perhaps the rise in coyote attacks is the beginning of a warning to us all. Beware the coyote, for it fears you not. And though timid in most encounters, it's only waiting for the moment when it can take you by surprise. You're listening to the Drift and Ramble podcast. We'll be back after this message. Are you a podcaster looking for an easy way to attract new advertisers to your podcast? At advertisecast.com, we have created a simplified service that allows podcasters to sell ad space on their show. How does it work? Just set up your free podcast profile at advertisecast.com. Then, it's published to our marketplace where hundreds of advertisers shop for ad spots and podcast opportunities. It's totally free to add your listing. We earn a percentage of every order made by the advertiser. You keep 80% of the total sale, while we earn 20% to cover our operating costs. We also facilitate all payments and payouts and cover all credit card processing fees so you can stay focused on creating great podcasts. All it takes is just 5 minutes to add your listing. Drift and Ramble listeners, simply visit advertisecast.com/drift. Once again, that's advertisecast.com/drift. Due to the graphic nature of this episode, listener discretion is advised. The pale dead moon, some call the hunter's moon, hangs awkward in the midnight sky. It's tangled in the stringy clouds torn to tattered shreds by the spiny pine tree tops huddled on the hillside, where the cold gathers into clumps, and streams must edge their way around the rocks so as not to disturb them from their ancient sleep. It's fear that motivates the water to tiptoe past the sleeping giants, and it's fear that wakes you from your sleep and compels you to peer out the window at this scene. Fear is the scratching in the ceiling, the raven's caw, and the creaking of the floorboards when nothing seen walks upon them. It's what causes you to find your shoes with your eyes and flip them over before you put your feet inside. Fear is what you fear most. It's not the scorpion inside your shoe. For that, you can easily dispatch, if you can only see it. But fear itself is unseen. It's unheard, yet just beyond a whisper where you cannot make out the words. It's fear that finds its way into the smallest confines of your thoughts and burrows deep inside them, laying its eggs, hatching its larvae, feeding upon itself like a perpetual serpent feeding on its own tail. Fear compels you, consumes you, surrounds you, and envelops you. In the wooded hills of Appalachia, in a remote cabin miles from any other neighbor's home, a woman clutches her child as the baby cries and cries. The cold outside has wrapped her cabin in its unforgiving grasp as it tries to draw its bony fingers into a fist. The woman's husband has gone to hunt for deer that roam these thickly wooded lowlands, but he's left her trapped within the silence and the snow outside, while inside, the baby only cries and cries, its face contorted into a tiny tide of red, wrinkled skin, a feverish wail, and no end in sight. She cradles the child against her, wrapped in blankets, and tries to sit in her rocking chair by the fire and rock it back to sleep. But fear will soon consume her. What if her husband doesn't come home? What if the baby is sick with something serious? It's so cold, and the snow so deep. How will she ever find a doctor now? The moon dips down below the tree line. It's later now, and the wind begins to push the snow into every crevice, every surface, every thought. If her husband doesn't return with food, if he isn't successful, or he doesn't return at all, she knows that she is doomed. There isn't any food left, even for the baby. The bitter cold on her spine is a reminder of the drafty house, her only known protection against the cold. A single, rickety, old rough-hewn door is the only thing to keep it out. And still, the baby cries. Standing now, she peers past the curtains, out the window at the glistening snow, inviting her to come witness its wonderment and glory. The bright white blanket of sparkling ice beckons her to come and see. Come and see. The dim light of the moon plays upon the shadows in the snowdrift like a demon dancing in the wind. She catches herself, fearing the worst. Her husband is lost, frozen in the snow. All hope is lost. She will starve, and her baby will die. Frozen in fear. Then she sees something moving outside just beyond the tree line. She can't quite make it out. Is it him? Has her husband returned? Why would he skirt the tree line and not walk up directly onto the cabin's small porch? If it's not her husband out there, what could it be? Squinting now to make out what may be lurking in the shadows just a few feet from her door, she sees a flicker of an image before the wind and snow obscure it. 2 eyes? Was it 2 eyes looking at her? 2 eyes belonging to what? A thing? A man? A beast? The wind howls against the tiny cabin door, forcing the cold to slip through the floorboards and find a hold around her ankles. The fire is becoming dim. Is there enough cut wood? Where is her husband now? The moon sits lower in the sky. It will be dawn soon. Dawn will bring the light and some relief to all this fear. She slowly lifts her head to see the 2 eyes are at the window now. They blink and stare directly into hers. 2 large yellow eyes, so big and set so far apart they cannot be human. It cannot be human. She stifles her own scream and holds the child tightly to her chest. The porch sags under the weight of the intruder. A dull but distinct thud of footfalls on the snow-covered wood. The creaking protest of the planks beneath the weight. And then she hears the first chuff. A bear, a large black bear, driven by hunger, braced against the cold, pushing its nose against the door. It's latched, she confirms, with no relief, straining her eyes in the failing light. The board across the brace gives it strength against the wind. But a bear? A full-grown male bear who stands 8 feet tall and weighs over 750 pounds? That door is no match for him. He sniffs again around the door base and moves across the porch, each plank protesting as he moves. She is frozen in her fear now, clutching the child so tightly, praying with all her heart the child doesn't make a sound. Not now. Dear God, not now, she silently pleads. The fire is nearly out now. Its amber glow has faded to a dull red hue, ash more prevalent than ember. The wood on the porch is cut and dry, but she cannot reach it now. No way she can reach it now. She dares not approach the window, nor does she move a muscle as the wind once more howls against the door. Fear is all around her in the darkest hour before the dawn. But soon the light is changing. The shadows recede. and fear finds a cloak to hide in. Footsteps crush the icy crust of the frozen snow. A familiar pattern. She rushes to the window to see his silhouette against the snow. Her husband has returned, and he has been successful. With her only free hand, she removes the plank from the door and opens the latch. Her husband's large frame fills the doorway as she steps backwards. He smiles, and she looks up tearfully. The baby isn't crying. It hasn't cried for hours. She was so frightened, so fearful of the night, the cold, and the bear. She had gripped the baby so tightly, hoping that it would not cry, praying that it did not cry. And indeed, it did not cry, could not cry, because she had held the child so closely. She suffocated the child. And fear slipped out unnoticed to lurk amongst the shadows, waiting for its chance to take control again. One of my favorite places in the West is Sedona, Arizona. And one time during a visit there, we stumbled into a little store that had a great collection of Day of the Dead figures and artwork. Among them was a figure called El Borracho, which depicted the classic image of a drunk gaucho skeleton holding a tequila bottle and leaning against a saguaro cactus. I wanted to buy the little guy and take him home, but our budget was exhausted and our schedule didn't allow for a return trip to that store. So, I thought about the little fellow and stuffed his memory into the corner of my mind. A few years later, I saw a similar figure for sale online, and the idea to write about him came flooding to the surface. I thought, what would happen if you found the bones of a desperado all by itself in the middle of the desert? A few minutes later, I had a kind of a cowboy poem, and I decided to record it the next day. Though I've put the poem out without music, this is the original vision, complete with music, written and performed by yours truly. It's called The Ghost of El Borracho. The Ghost of El Borracho. In the still night sky of the desert moon lies the bleach-white bones of a man in ruins. Between a busted heart and a cactus bloom lives the ghost of El Borracho. When the West was wild and the future loomed, and boots tread planks through loud saloons, came a mustached man with six-gun tunes, sang the ghost of El Borracho. And the guitar played as the bar girls swooned. The mustached man poured, drank, and crooned. Then one girl motioned up to her room, to the ghost of El Borracho. In drunken madness these two bloomed, till morning found them fit like spoons. A jealous fool arrived too soon for the ghost of El Borracho. A single gunshot's deep despair, crimson stains and raven hair, a mournful wail and sober stare, for the jealous fool was never there, just the ghost of El Borracho. Stumble out to where saguaro grow, the drunken outlaw killer knows that no man dares this far to go, save the ghost of El Borracho. A jealous rage, a god-sized thirst, a sun-baked waltz through the desert's worst. To die alone, but not the first, was the ghost of El Borracho. A needle's haystack found these bones, and how the wind and bar girl moans. In the desert night so all alone, sings the ghost of El Borracho. Threadbare, ragged, barely there. Some bootstraps, buttons, strands of hair. Don't touch the things that you find there, or chance the ghost of El Borracho. Coyotes howl, the barn owl hoots, a 6-gun that no longer shoots. Nothing left a man can loot from the ghost of El Borracho. A needle's haystack found these bones, and how the wind and bar girl moans. In the desert night so all alone, sings the ghost of El Borracho. Desperate as the day is long, there is no end to El Borracho's song. He sings until you move along, or you dance with El Borracho. The Mysterious Angel's Glow of Shiloh. The Battle of Shiloh, sometimes called the Battle of Pittsburgh Landing, took place on April 6th and 7th, 1862. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. In the resulting carnage came a strange phenomenon that went unexplained for nearly 140 years. Commanding the Union forces was General Ulysses S. Grant, and in command of the Confederate forces was General Albert Sidney Johnston. Grant's plan was to bring his troops up the Tennessee River and gather them in southern Tennessee to strike into Mississippi. But General Johnston massed his troops in the nearby town of Corinth, Mississippi, and used the element of surprise to drive the Union soldiers back. The tactic worked well in the early part of the day, but General Johnston was killed later that afternoon. Though it first seemed like the Confederates would be victorious, by that evening, Grant was able to form a strong defensive line, and during the night, more Union reinforcements arrived to support him. As the bloody battle continued, Grant forced the Confederates to retreat. The Battle of Shiloh was the first grisly battle of the Civil War, with well over 20,000 casualties on both sides. The battlefield was littered with dead and wounded soldiers. Moans filled the cool evening air as day turned into night. It was clear to the command, by the massive casualties, that the Civil War would not come to a quick conclusion. The fighting was ferocious, and it rampaged from dawn to dusk. The carnage so intense that medical personnel were quickly overwhelmed. The casualties were simply left where they fell. As darkness descended upon these desperate souls, all but abandoned in the muddy, bloody battlefields of Shiloh, so came the rains. And if that wasn't enough insult to injury, a strange and bizarre phenomenon began to occur. Many of the wounded were left lying on the battlefield for days, and they began to suffer from hypothermia, and amidst their shivering cold, they began to exhibit a strange phosphorus glow emanating from their open wounds. This eerie pale blue light was easy to spot among the wounded. For 2 days and 2 nights, the soldiers who survived their wounds lay in the cold, wet field awaiting medical attention. Then, things got even stranger. All the men who reported that their wounds had been glowing in the night seemed to heal faster than those whose wounds did not glow. These men with the glowing wounds not only healed faster, but they had a much higher survival rate than those whose wounds did not glow. And these glowing wounds had far less infection and even less scarring than the non-glowing wounded. Many of the men who survived this battle probably couldn't have survived by any other means than by the help of this ghostly, weird blue light shining from their wounds. The surviving soldiers gave it a nickname. They called it Angel's Glow. It was a logical conclusion that only an angel could have helped them heal. And the otherworldly strange blue light? Well, that was clearly a sign from heaven. For years, the medical communities dismissed these Civil War stories as folklore and legend. Still, the stories persisted, and the survivors swore that these tales were true. Over the years, the strange tales of the Angel's Glow began to fade from memory. But in 2001, things took another bizarre turn when 17-year-old Bill Martin and his family visited the Shiloh battlefield where he learned the legend of the mysterious Angel's Glow. You see, Bill's mom just happened to be a microbiologist who had studied a soil bacterium called Photorhabdus luminescens, also known as P. luminescens, which is a bioluminescent, meaning it gives off its own light. A strange, pale blue light, in fact. And that got Bill Martin thinking, what if this legend was true? With encouragement from his mom and a school science fair coming up, Bill and his friend Jonathan Curtis set out to prove if this could be the source of the mysterious Angel's Glow. The boys learned that P. luminescens live inside nematodes, tiny parasitic worms that burrow into insect larvae in the soil or in plants. Once rooted in the larvae, nematodes vomit up bacteria, which contain chemicals that kill the host larvae and any other microorganisms living inside of them. Talk about your toxic personalities. They were close, but Bill and Jonathan's experiments still failed to explain this Civil War folklore as something more than a myth. There was still one major problem with their theory. P. luminescens cannot survive at normal human body temperature. Stumped, the boys continued to investigate the circumstances of the Battle of Shiloh. The battle was in April, and the weather was still cold. The boys figured out that many survivors lying on the cold, wet ground for 2 days had developed hypothermia, and thus lowered their body temperatures. So when the nematodes from the muddy soil got into the wounds, the bacteria had the perfect environment to thrive and glow. And this weird parasitic reaction saved the men's lives by puking on, killing off the other more dangerous germs. In a strange twist of fate, these glowing microscopic puke worms were fighting off infection. Though, if allowed to thrive, they eventually might have killed off the men as well. But once the men were collected, hospitalized, and brought up to normal body temperature, the little organisms died, allowing the healing process to become far more rapid. With wounds free from infection, the men were able to heal more rapidly, and thus, the Angel's Glow really had spared their lives. Whether sent from heaven or not, the boys proved that legends aren't always untrue, and truth really is stranger than fiction. More from the Drift and Ramble podcast when we return. Want to grow your business and reach new customers? Whether you're launching a new product, app, book, crowdfunding campaign, or looking to get your existing products and services in front of new potential customers, AdvertiseCast is a great solution. AdvertiseCast is the first online marketplace that lets you buy ad spots from hundreds of different podcasts and radio shows online. Simply shop listings online and see detailed information about each show. You'll be sure to find shows that work well for your product or service. Give us a shot and try podcast advertising today. For more information, please visit advertisecast.com. Once again, that's advertisecast.com. Hurry! 30-second ad spots are going for just $5.
Hi, this is Cheryl. Your feedback is important to us. If you have a comment or suggestion, we'd really love to hear from you. You can contact us through our website, that's driftandramble.com. You'll see a listener survey button on every page, and we'd really appreciate your input on the survey. Please take a few moments to complete it, and you'll have our thanks in return.
This episode marks our 10th edition of the Drift and Ramble podcast. I really wasn't sure where this was going when we started this podcast, but your feedback and support has been tremendous. We feel very fortunate to have great listeners like you. Cheryl and I have both enjoyed reading your comments on the website, your tweets, and especially reading your reviews on iTunes. Starting this month, we'll choose a few of these reviews to share with you. But first, I want to mention some of the other excellent podcasts we've been listening to. Liz Sauer's Ghost in the Burbs is a scary story podcast we love. The stories are all set around modern-day Wellesley, Massachusetts, and are written and performed by Liz Sauer. Ghost in the Burbs delivers some spine-tingling tales of suburban living, but be forewarned, there is some adult language. You can find the show on iTunes by searching for Ghost in the Burbs, or follow her on Twitter by the same name. Our newest find is a tremendous podcast called Art Curious, where host Jennifer Dassel provides some fascinating details about art and art history. Jennifer describes the show as exploring the unexpected, the slightly odd, and the strangely wonderful in art history. And she does a masterful job of bringing these stories to life. The most recent episode includes Ouija, a well-known crime photographer, and how he and Andy Warhol crossed paths. You don't have to be an art lover to love the fine art of storytelling, and the Art Curious podcast is indeed fine art. You can find them on iTunes, Stitcher, and on Twitter at Art Curious. All one word, Art Curious. And lastly, we've been very fortunate to be part of the Podern family. Podern Family is a group of podcasters supporting each other, and it's a great way to find new and interesting podcasts. Just search the hashtag Podern Family, and you'll be introduced to shows about movie reviews, comedy, music, personal journals, science and science fiction, and just about anything else you can imagine. And if you're a podcaster, Podern Family is a great way to help promote your show. Now, here's Cheryl with some of the reviews that we've received on iTunes.
Still a Twins fan writes, 5 stars. Can't wait for more. I started with Wendigo Psychosis. That was episode 9, by the way. And now I have to go back for more. It's like lore for American West history. This podcast needs more episodes. Sean at GTPB says, 5 stars. Excellent show. Binge listened to the entire catalog in one day. Can't get enough. Left me wanting more. I'm hooked. EJR says, 5 stars. Fun look at legends of the Old West. Lots of great info here. Entertaining, funny, spooky, and great music too. If you'd like us to mention your review on the show, be sure to leave a review for us. You can leave reviews on iTunes or Stitcher, and we'd love to hear from you. Leave us a review today.
Next time on the Drift and Ramble podcast, it's the story of Judge Roy Bean. There's a bit about this crazy old coot you might not know. For instance, his older brother Joshua was the first mayor of San Diego. But before he was known as Judge Roy Bean, this colorful character of the West was also quite the ladies' man, and women swooned and fawned over the handsome devil. This led to a duel that led to incarceration and Bean's eventual jailbreak. Not a bad start for a guy who considered himself to be the law west of the Pecos. That's all coming up on the next edition of the Drift and Ramble podcast. Until we meet again, I'm Steve Blizin.
The Drift and Ramble podcast is a Clear Voice Media production, hosted and produced by Steve Blizin, with segment research and voice acting by Cheryl Blizin. Additional contributions and content have been made possible by support from individuals dedicated to the art and science of storytelling and exploring the still fertile promise of the American West.
You must never be fooled by imitations.
I'm tired of treasure hunting.
Then start looking harder, a lot harder.
How do they do it? Where do they find all that energy? That seemingly inexhaustible store of pep and ginger?
Hey, keep quiet down